Standing between Europe and Asia and spending a period of time stretching from classical antiquity to the Renaissance, the Byzantine Empire linked different worlds and different ages. This gave a special dimension to the cultural interactions of Byzantine civilization with those of neighboring countries and peoples. Heir to antiquity and the culture of Hellenes, and until the 12th century the leading power in Europe and the Near East, the Byzantine Empire was the nucleus of a vast area in which the Orthodox Church was the dominant form of expression of spiritual life. The frontiers of Eastern Christendom were largely established by the early 11th century. By this time they encompassed huge tracts of southeastern and eastern Europe. In the Near East, in the North Africa and in the Western Mediterranean region, however, Byzantium had lost considerable ground as a result of confrontation with the Muslim world, the Latin West and the papacy. Misunderstandings between Rome and Constantinople came to a head with the schism of 1054, and the rupture became final with the struggles and disputes arising from the Crusades. In the lost lands, the once dominant Byzantine culture slowly disappeared with the passage of time and by implementation of other civilizations. In the northern regions of Eastern Christendom, matters evolved differently. Here, the population, for the most part of Slavic origin, had progressively been drawn into the orbit of Byzantium. Relations between the Slavs and Byzantium were very complex. The initiative in establishing contacts was generally taken by the Slavs, and early links were strengthened with the formation of the Slav states. The first historically recorded contacts date from the end of the 5th century AD, during the closing stages of the Great Migration, which had seen the establishment of Slav peoples over vast areas of Eastern, Central and Southeastern Europe. In the 7th century they arrived in the north of the Balkan Peninsula and settled in large numbers in Moesia, Macedonia, Illyria and northern Thrace. Groups of Slavs also moved into Thessaly, northern Greece, the Peloponnese and the Aegean Islands. As Byzantium faced up to its new neighbors, its aim was not to dislodge them, but rather secure control over them, to transform them into Christians and absorb them as vassals of the empire. These contacts and the occupation of lands which had been intensively cultivated for ages past and which contained centers of sophisticated urban life had a catalytic effect on the social development of the Slavs. In a great many cases, the Slavs did not drive the original inhabitants out of the lands, but merged peacefully with them. The arrival of the Slavs in the Balkans was also a matter of great importance for the Byzantine Empire. They filled the vacuum left by the devastating campaigns of the Goths, Huns, Proto-Bulgars, Avars and the earlier, less friendly Slav tribes. The Slavs who settled in the former Roman province of Moesia found themselves in a particularly favorable situation, with all-round natural protection afforded by the Danube, the Black Sea and the Balkan Mountains. It was here during the last quarter of the 7th century that the Slav settlers joined forces with and accepted the temporary leadership of a relatively small but militarily well-organized group of new arrivals, the Proto-Bulgar horde of Khan Asparuh, and created the first Slav state on Byzantine soil, Bulgaria. Byzantium maintained close and lasting contacts with this new state, and towards the middle of the 9th century, when independent states were founded in the western and northwestern parts of the Balkan Peninsula, the empire entered into regular political relations with the Serbs and the Croats. Among the instruments of Byzantine politics and diplomacy, conversion to Christianity was a powerful and well-tried tool. According to time, place and circumstance, it was used as a first step towards expansion of the empire, as a method of securing friendly neutrality, of strengthening political influence, or of acquiring allies and vassals. Byzantine clergy had acquired a great experience in converting and subduing alien neighbors. Unlike the Latin West, they allowed newly converted peoples to worship in their own language, particularly when the political possibilities of absorbing them appeared unrealistic. In 863 AD, the Kingdom of Great Moravia became the first Slav state to accept the Christianity of Byzantium as its official religion. The same period saw the invention by Constantine and Methodius of Slavonic alphabet. The two brothers also translated into Slavonic all the canonical and liturgical literature that was required for the normal functioning of the church. They became the leaders of a devoted group of Slav disciples and pupils, and their work launched a revolutionary process in the cultural development of Bulgaria, Serbia, and ancient Russia. During the last third of the 9th century and the century that followed, Slavonic letters made triumphant progress in all the Slav countries and became accessible to virtually every segment of society. The principal role in spreading literacy among the Slavs and in disseminating the so-called Old Slavonic literature belonged to the Kingdom of Bulgaria. When in 865 AD Bulgaria adopted the Christian faith, the Byzantines, for political reasons, deliberately refrained from providing new church either with clerics of Slav background or with church books in Slavonic language, and services had to be conducted in Greek. In 893, however, things changed. After the accession to the Bulgarian throne of Tsar Simeon, who was to become the country's greatest medieval ruler, Greek, which had remained the official state language, was announced. Worship in the Slavonic language was introduced in the churches, and the Greek clergy were expelled. Under the inspiring influence of Cyril and Methodius, the number of educated people sharply increased, and the foundations were laid of an original and, for the period, highly sophisticated spiritual culture which made itself felt in the neighboring Slav countries and in Serbia and in Russia particular. This was the golden age of Bulgarian literature. The close similarity between the written language and the popular speech of Bulgaria was of no small significance in the development of national education, while the same period also saw a flowering of architecture, painting, mosaics, ceramics, glassware, and other applied arts. The second great leap forward in the cultural development of Bulgaria occurred at the turn of the 12th and 13th centuries. During this period, the Bulgarian Zograf monastery, founded on Mount Athos in the 12th century, played an important role in strengthening cultural contacts with Byzantium, Serbia, and Russia. Outstanding developments in Serbian culture and in literature in particular date from the 12th century onwards. Serbia's first golden age was linked with the coming to power of Nemanja dynasty, and in particular with the reign of Stephen Nemanja. Relations between Byzantium and Russia began to develop at somewhat later date. Early Russia, or Rus as it was called, was situated so far from the frontiers of the empire that there was no danger of direct Byzantine aggression. Throughout an alliance with the Pechengs, Byzantine diplomacy aimed to contain the military raids of the Russians and to deny them access to Byzantium's markets. The attempt failed, and even before they were united in a single state, the Russians had established trading relations with the Chersons and Byzantium's Crimean colonies. Pressing on still further, the Russian merchant adventurers, part traders and part soldiers, reached the Byzantine commercial centers on the southern shores of the Black Sea, and in 860 AD their ships dropped anchor beneath the walls of the Constantinople itself. During the decade which followed the arrival of the Russians of Constantinople, a number of their leaders were converted to Christianity. At the beginning of the 10th century, a Christian church dedicated to Saint Elias existed in Kiev. In the middle of the same country, Olga, the widow of Prince Igor, who had become the Russian ruler, was baptized during a visit to Constantinople, and in 989 Prince Vladimir accepted Christianity as the religion of his country. Bulgarian experience and the already rich stock of Bulgarian literature were of considerable service in the enlightenment of Russia. Less than half a century after conversion, Kiev and Russia entered a period of cultural development that was to reach its zenith in the 12th century. This period saw the construction of magnificent palaces and churches. Painting and the applied arts flourished, and the splendors of 11th century Kiev, including its cathedral of St. Sophia and the Golden Gate, made the city a worthy rival of Constantinople itself. The influence of Byzantine models was particularly apparent in religious and moralistic didactic literature, architecture in stone and mosaic work, stained glass, icons, monumental painting and book illumination. In all these fields, however, the Slavs began a century and a half or so after conversion to Christianity to develop their own artistic schools, language and idiom, which reached back into their pre-Christian traditions and pagan art and culture. The result was a creative remodeling of Byzantine examples and their adaptation to local tastes and requirements. When Slavs sort of escaped from the constraints of official religious ideology, spiritual life was clearly influenced by local traditions going back to farthest antiquity. And even today, without knowledge of living traditions of the pagan culture of the Slavs, it is impossible to begin to understand Serbian heroic songs, the popular festivities of the Bulgarians, or the epic poems of the ancient Russia. Cultural interchange between Byzantium and Slavdom was conditioned in great measure by the selective approach which the latter adopted as far as the Byzantine legacy was concerned. Indeed, selectivity on both sides reflected the single-minded policies of rulers of each. Byzantium refrained from transmitting certain matters which it considered dangerous for neophytes, while the rulers of the newly converted Slavic countries rejected importations which seemed alien and potentially harmful to them, such as an employment of eunuchs as state officials or organized horse racing tournaments. An even more important reason for selectivity in the adoption of Byzantine civilization was the incompatibility of many of its aspects with the Slav environment. Byzantine legal texts and temporal law had virtually no impact in Russia, whose legislation took the native form of Russkaya Pravda, a collection of laws whose origins could be traced back to pagan times. In the Latin West, the period from the 9th to the 12th century saw the formation of original cultures in all the major states, despite a single ideological center and single language, which, although incomprehensible to the bulk of their populations, it dominated religious life, affairs of state, science and culture. In Slav countries of Eastern Christendom, however, original cultures ripened more rapidly for a number of reasons. Their churches were less dependent on Constantinople than their Western counterparts were on Rome, and the language of literature and of the church was not Greek, but their own Slavonic language, which was comprehensible to the people of Bulgaria, Serbia and Russia alike. Half a century after their conversion to Christianity, these countries all had their own identifiable cultures. When, after a century and a half, Byzantium managed to acquire undivided control over the Balkans, to liquidate the kingdoms of Bulgaria and to annex the Serbian principalities, the cultures of these countries were sufficiently well established to resist not only assimilation but also any substantial degree of transformation. The historical memory of their early independence, the persistence of their own literacy and literature, their own customs and lifestyles, and their ethnic self-awareness served as banners in the armed struggle to reconquer their freedom, which they regained during the last quarter of the 12th century. It is not surprising, therefore, that deep mutual sympathy grew up between the South and East Slavs and the Greek people that was to last for many centuries. Nor it is surprising that when, with the fall of Byzantium and the South Slav countries, Russia remained the last bastion of European Orthodox Christianity, and the peoples conquered by the Ottoman Turks looked to Russia for deliverance. And in conclusion, it is not surprising that all Orthodox countries are connected to each other in one way or another, even today.